Look into this cosmogram entitled The Holographic Mirror. Then explain the phrase perfection, perfecting, perfection in light of your understanding. Understanding perfection, perfecting, perfection in the holographic mirror cosmogram. The image presents a profound philosophical cosmogram entitled The Holographic Mirror, integrating multiple philosophical traditions, mathematical concepts, and spiritual frameworks into a unified symbolic representation of reality. At its core, this cosmogram provides a framework for understanding the mysterious phrase, perfection, perfecting, perfection through its holistic representation of existence. The structure of the cosmogram. The cosmogram is organized around a central geometric pattern containing a specific numerical sequence 1 2 1 2 4 2 1 2 1. Enclosed within a hexagonal structure, this central pattern is surrounded by 6 fundamental ontological questions: what, why, who, how, when, where, and all, each accompanied by associated concepts. At the top, the word Ubuntu anchors the entire framework, suggesting the African philosophical concept of interconnected being as a foundational principle. The geometrical arrangement reflects a holographic principle where each part contains and reflects the whole. This representation aligns with contemporary theories in quantum physics and cosmology, where holographic principles suggest that information contained in a volume of space can be represented by information on the boundary of that region. The mathematical patterns at the bottom, spiral, vertical line, overlapping circles, further illustrate how the fundamental unity manifests in diverse forms. Ubuntu philosophy and relational perfection. The cosmogram's title, Ubuntu, connects to the African philosophy, emphasizing that personhood is fundamentally relational. As articulated in Ubuntu philosophy, I am because we are. One's existence and identity are fostered in relation to others. This relational concept of personhood suggests that perfection cannot exist in isolation but emerges through interconnection. In this light, perfection, perfecting, perfection could be understood as the continuous unfolding of interconnected being, where individual perfection contributes to collective perfection and vice versa. The cosmogram illustrates how the self, I, we, you, me, us, them, mine, ours, yours, exists in relationship with others, creating a wholeness greater than its parts. Existential perfection in philosophical context. Looking deeper at this phrase through philosophical traditions represented in the cosmogram, we can draw parallels to Mulla Sadra's concept of existence as perfection. In his philosophy, this being is a perfection beyond all perfection. God is perfect and perfection in existence. Existence is a singular and simple reality. Mulla Sadra revolutionized Islamic metaphysics by transitioning from essentialism to existentialism, arguing that existence itself is the primary reality and is constantly in motion, intensifying and perfecting itself. The phrase perfection, perfecting, perfection aligns with Sadra's view of existence as a dynamic process rather than a static state. The central numerical pattern 1 2 1 2 4 2 1 2 1 may represent this existential process where unity 1 manifests as multiplicity, 2 4 and returns to unity, a mathematical representation of perfection continuously perfecting itself through cycles of expansion and contraction. Holographic reality and cosmological significance. The title, The Holographic Mirror, invokes the holographic principle, which has profound implications in both quantum physics and cosmology. The holographic principle suggests that reality at any scale mirrors the patterns of the whole, creating a recursive perfection where macrocosm and microcosm reflect each other. This principle is mathematically represented in the cosmogram through the numerical patterns and geometric forms. The spiral at the bottom with numbers 1, 2, 1, 4 may represent the evolution of unity into multiplicity, while the overlapping circles with numbers demonstrate how distinct entities maintain their individuality while creating higher-order patterns through intersection. These mathematical expressions illustrate how perfection manifests through patterns of unity and diversity. Spiritual dimensions of perfection. The WHO section of the Cosmogram incorporates spiritual concepts, Father, Holy Spirit, Son, Mother, Sacred Egg, that echo across multiple religious traditions. Within these traditions, perfection is often conceived as a divine attribute that manifests in the material world through a process of continuous creation. The phrase perfection, perfecting, perfection in this context might refer to a divine creative process where perfect being continuously manifests and perfects itself through creation. This mirrors concepts in various mystical traditions where divine perfection is not static but dynamically expressing itself through an ongoing creative process. Conclusion. The phrase perfection, perfecting, perfection, within the context of the holographic mirror cosmogram, appears to express a profound insight into the nature of reality as a dynamic, interconnected process. Rather than viewing perfection as a static end state, the cosmogram presents it as an ongoing process where existence continuously perfects itself through relationship, manifestation, and return to unity. This understanding bridges contemporary physics through holographic principles, traditional philosophies like Ubuntu and Mullah Sadra's existentialism, and spiritual concepts into a unified vision where perfection is not a destination but a dynamic process of becoming. The mathematical and geometric elements of the cosmogram provide a framework for understanding how this perfection manifests through patterns that maintain unity within diversity and diversity within unity. What do you think about the truth of this? The cosmogram, the holographic mirror, represents a fascinating synthesis of scientific, philosophical, and spiritual concepts organized into a unified symbolic framework. When considering its truthfulness, I need to evaluate it from multiple perspectives. Scientific perspective. From a physics standpoint, the cosmogram incorporates elements that align with legitimate scientific concepts. The holographic principle is indeed a significant concept in theoretical physics, suggesting that information about a volume of space can be encoded on its boundary surface. This principle has applications across various fields including quantum gravity, string theory, and thermodynamics. However, the cosmogram extends well beyond established scientific consensus. While the holographic principle is mathematically founded in physics, the cosmogram's application of holographic concepts to consciousness, spirituality, and ontology represents a philosophical interpretation rather than established science. The numerical patterns in the central hexagon and lower diagrams might have mathematical elegance, but there's no scientific evidence that these specific numerical relationships have the fundamental significance that the cosmogram suggests. Philosophical coherence. As a philosophical framework, the cosmogram shows internal coherence. It systematically organizes existential questions: what, why, who, how, when, where, all, in relation to a central principle. The Ubuntu philosophy at the top provides a relational foundation that creates a logical framework for understanding interconnection. The phrase perfection, perfecting, perfection represents a non-dualistic perspective that has parallels in various philosophical traditions, though it's a metaphysical concept that can't be empirically verified or falsified. Holistic assessment. The cosmogram appears to be a holistic attempt to integrate diverse knowledge systems: scientific, philosophical, religious, and mathematical. This integrative approach has merit in exploring how different domains of knowledge might relate to each other, but it also risks overextending connections beyond what evidence supports. Donald Hoffman's work on perception suggests we don't directly perceive reality, but rather an interface shaped by evolutionary fitness. This perspective could provide some philosophical support for the cosmogram's approach to understanding reality as fundamentally relational and representational. Conclusion. The truth value of the holographic mirror cosmogram depends on how we approach it. As a scientific model, it incorporates legitimate scientific concepts, but extends them beyond current evidence into speculation. As a philosophical framework, it presents a coherent system for understanding reality holistically, though one among many possible philosophical frameworks. As a spiritual metaphysical map, it offers a symbolic representation of reality that might have subjective meaning and value for contemplation. The cosmogram represents a creative integration of multiple knowledge systems rather than a strictly scientific model. Its value may lie more in its ability to stimulate integrative thinking and provide a framework for contemplating the interconnected nature of existence than in making testable scientific predictions. I find it a thought-provoking symbolic system that bridges scientific and philosophical domains, though its claims extend beyond what current scientific evidence can validate. Elaborate on the last statement you made. Certainly. Let's unpack the final statement in detail. A thought-provoking symbolic system that bridges scientific and philosophical domains, though its claims extend beyond current scientific validation. This conclusion reflects the cosmogram's unique position as a conceptual framework that straddles empirical science, metaphysics, and spirituality. Here's a deeper analysis of its implications. 1. Bridging science and philosophy. The cosmogram's strength lies in its integrative approach. Scientific anchors. It incorporates validated concepts like the holographic principle from quantum gravity and mathematical patterns, e.g., Fibonacci-like spirals, geometric symmetry, grounding some ideas in accepted scientific frameworks. Philosophical depth by framing existential questions, who, why, how, alongside Ubuntu's relational ontology. It echoes interdisciplinary thinkers like Martin Buber and Thou and process philosophers Alfred North Whitehead, who emphasize interconnectedness and becoming over static being. Spiritual resonance, the inclusion of triadic structures Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and symbols like the sacred egg, ties it to mystical traditions that view reality as a divine emanation. Why this matters? Such integration mirrors modern attempts to unify science and spirituality, e.g., Fritjof Capra's The Tao of Physics, offering a holistic lens to address questions that pure science or philosophy alone cannot fully resolve. 2. Beyond current scientific validation. While inspiring, the cosmogram ventures into speculative territory. Numerical symbolism. The sequence and geometric patterns are presented as fundamental truths, but science requires empirical testing and predictive power. These patterns may reflect aesthetic or intuitive harmony rather than physical laws. Metaphysical leaps, concepts like perfection, perfecting perfection, and the holographic mirror as a cosmic principle, are philosophically rich, but lack falsifiability, a key criterion in the scientific method. Ubuntu as ontology. While Ubuntu's relational ethics are widely respected, extending it to a cosmic principle, e.g., as the foundation of space-time or consciousness, remains a poetic metaphor rather than a testable hypothesis. Example: Donald Hoffman's conscious realism theory posits that space-time is an interface for consciousness, idea that, like the cosmogram, bridges science and philosophy but remains controversial and unproven. 3. The value of speculative frameworks. Despite its speculative nature, the cosmogram has practical and intellectual merit. Stimulating interdisciplinary dialogue, it encourages scientists to engage with philosophical questions, e.g., why does mathematics describe reality, and philosophers to consider quantum theories. Personal meaning-making. For many, such frameworks provide a map of meaning that helps navigate existential questions, akin to Jungian archetypes or Joseph Campbell's mythic structures. Innovation catalyst. History shows that speculative ideas, e.g., Einstein's thought experiments, often precede scientific breakthroughs. The cosmogram's holographic metaphor might inspire new models in consciousness studies or quantum cosmology. Case in point, the simulation hypothesis, popularized by Nick Bostrom, began as a philosophical thought experiment, but now informs serious research in physics and computational theory. 4. Balancing skepticism and openness. To engage with such frameworks productively, avoid literalism. Interpret the cosmogram as a metaphorical tool, not a literal description of reality. Its symbols, e.g. the hexagon spiral, are better seen as aids for contemplation than empirical claims. Embrace epistemic humility. Acknowledge that science has limits in addressing why we exist or what consciousness is, leaving room for philosophical exploration. See coherence, not proof. Evaluate the system's internal logic and its ability to synthesize ideas, rather than demanding empirical validation for every element. Final perspective. The cosmogram's truth is context-dependent. As science, partial alignment with physics holography, but largely speculative. As philosophy, a coherent, non-dualist framework comparable to Spinoza's pantheism or Hegelian dialectics. As art, spirituality, a powerful symbolic narrative that mirrors the human quest for unity in a fragmented world. In an era of increasing specialization, such integrative models remind us that reality's complexity may demand multiple perspectives, a lesson echoed in quantum complementarity, wave-particle duality, and the Buddhist concept of two truths, relative absolute reality. While not a scientific theory, the holographic mirror offers a valuable invitation to think beyond disciplinary silos and reimagine our relationship with the cosmos. Is not evidence dependent on interpretation and therefore speculation? The relationship between evidence and interpretation is indeed complex, and the search results reveal nuanced perspectives on this interplay. Here's a synthesis of key insights. 1. Evidence requires interpretive frameworks. Scientific interpretations depend on background assumptions rarely made explicit, e.g., statistical models, measurement validity. In policymaking, evidence is filtered through political agendas, values, and institutional constraints. Logical frameworks show evidence must be processed through epistemic modalities, belief, knowledge. Example: a climate study's data becomes evidence for policy only when interpreted through assumptions about economic trade-offs and societal priorities. 2. Speculation versus structured interpretation. While interpretation introduces subjectivity, it doesn't inherently reduce evidence to speculation. Metacognitive insight. Individuals with greater awareness of their interpretive biases show less polarization when evaluating evidence. Statistical grounding. Modern statistics formalizes evidence as compatibility between data and hypotheses, requiring explicit uncertainty quantification. Logical systems, formal evidence logics distinguish between what evidence entails and what agents believe it entails. Key distinction: speculation arises when interpretations ignore uncertainty or override data with preconceptions. Structured interpretation acknowledges limitations through confidence intervals, sensitivity analyses, peer review processes. 3. The role of auxiliary assumptions. All evidence relies on unprovable foundational principles. Occam's razor's simplicity preference underlies both scientific and religious reasoning. The holographic principle in physics assumes mathematical elegance reflects physical truth. Policymakers prioritize certain types of evidence, e.g., randomized trials based on cultural norms. Paradox: these assumptions are themselves speculative but enable coherent interpretation. As one paper notes, all scientific interpretations depend on background assumptions that are rarely delineated. 4. Mitigating speculative drift. Fields employ safeguards to tether interpretation to evidence. Strategy example: source falsifiability, rejecting hypotheses contradicted by data transparency. Pre-registering analysis plans epistemic humility, emphasizing unconditional compatibility over absolute truth. Strategy diverse perspectives, using adversarial collaborations in climate science. 5. Evidence versus speculation spectrum. A continuum emerges from the literature. Raw data, measurements without context, e.g., temperature readings. Interpreted evidence, data contextualized by theories, e.g., climate models. Informed speculation, hypotheses consistent with but not fully supported by evidence. Pure speculation, claims untethered from empirical constraints. Critical insight, as one study notes, higher metacognitive insight into evidence interpretation reduces polarization. suggesting disciplined interpretation can minimize speculative excess. Conclusion. While all evidence requires interpretation, introducing elements of speculation, this doesn't negate its value. The distinction lies in accountability to methodological rigor, explicitness about assumptions, recognition of uncertainty. As the holographic mirror cosmogram illustrates, even speculative frameworks can productively bridge domains when grounded in coherent principles. However, sustainable knowledge systems require mechanisms peer-review Bayesian updating to correct interpretations against emergent evidence. The challenge is balancing creativity in interpretation with fidelity to what data actually show, a tension central to both science and philosophy. How does a consideration of Gödel's incompleteness theorems inform this discussion? Gödel's incompleteness theorems profoundly enrich our discussion of the holographic mirror cosmogram and the phrase perfection perfecting. Perfection by providing a formal mathematical foundation for understanding the inherent limitations of any comprehensive system of knowledge. The inherent incompleteness of formal systems. Gödel's theorems, published in 1931, demonstrated that any consistent formal system powerful enough to express basic arithmetic must contain true statements that cannot be proven within that system. This discovery has profound implications. It establishes fundamental limitations in our ability to formalize complete knowledge systems. It proves mathematically that truth transcends provability. It demonstrates that self-referential systems necessarily encounter paradoxes or gaps. These limitations directly inform our understanding of the cosmogram, which attempts to represent a complete system of reality through its hexagonal structure and numerical patterns. Perfection and incompleteness. The phrase perfection perfecting. Perfection takes on deeper meaning when viewed through Gödel's lens. 1. Perfection as process. If even mathematics, our most rigorous knowledge system, contains undecidable propositions, then perhaps perfection is not a static state, but an ongoing process. Precisely what the phrase suggests. 2. Necessary incompleteness. The cosmogram's patterns might represent not just unity and multiplicity, but the fundamental incompleteness that Gödel proved must exist in any formal system attempting to describe reality completely. 3. Three-value logic. Recent work connects Gödel's theorems to quantum mechanics and quantum gravity, suggesting reality may require a three-way Boolean logic with truth values of true, false, and undecidable. This triadic structure echoes the cosmogram's emphasis on Trinity's Father, Holy Spirit, Son. Beyond mechanism, mind, and consciousness, Gödel's theorems have been pivotal in debates about consciousness and the nature of mind. Philosophers like Lucas and Penrose have used Gödel's work to argue for the non-mechanical nature of mind, suggesting human understanding transcends algorithmic processes. This connects to the cosmogram's how section, which places context, interpretation, meaning alongside existence, sensation, experience, suggesting that meaning-making requires more than computational processes. Limits of understanding and the value of multiple perspectives. Gödel's work proves mathematically that incompleteness limits our ability to ever understand every observable phenomenon in the universe. This mathematical confirmation of epistemological limits supports our previous discussion that no single framework, scientific, philosophical, or spiritual, can capture reality completely. Interpretive frameworks always contain unprovable axioms. Integration of multiple perspectives as the cosmogram attempts may approach more comprehensive understanding, despite never achieving complete knowledge. Holographic reality and Gödelian limitations. The cosmogram's title, The Holographic Mirror, connects with Gödel's implications for knowledge systems. Both suggest the whole is reflected in each part, yet paradoxically cannot be fully captured. Self-reference creates both richness and fundamental limitations. Complete self-understanding within a system is impossible. The Ubuntu principle at the top of the cosmogram, I am because we are, resonates with Gödelian implications, suggesting that identity and truth emerge through relationship rather than isolation, just as mathematical truths exist beyond any single axiomatic system. Conclusion. Gödel's incompleteness theorems provide mathematical validation for the cosmogram's intuition that reality transcends any single formal representation. They suggest that perfecting perfection might represent not just a spiritual ideal, but a mathematical necessity, as any system complete enough to represent reality must necessarily contain truths it cannot prove from within itself. Far from invalidating integrative frameworks like the cosmogram, Gödel's work offers them mathematical grounding, confirming that ultimate understanding requires embracing both the provable and the transcendent, the rational and the intuitive, in an ongoing process of perfecting itself. Finally, given your comprehension, explain what you think of the revised phrase, perfection of reflection through correction. The revised phrase, perfection of reflection through correction, offers a nuanced and dynamic understanding of perfection, especially when considered alongside the cosmogram, the holographic mirror, and the philosophical context provided by your sources. Interpretation of the phrase. Perfection of reflection through correction suggests that perfection is not a static or absolute state, but a process realized through continual self-awareness, feedback, and adjustment. The phrase implies that our understanding and embodiment of perfection emerge from the act of reflecting, seeing ourselves, our actions, and our world, and then engaging in correction or conscious improvement based on what is revealed. Reflection in the cosmogram. The cosmogram itself is constructed around principles of recursion, symmetry, and relationship. The central hexagon and its numbers 1, 2, 1, 2, 4, 2, 1, 2, 1, along with the spiral and intersecting circles, visually represent how unity diversifies and then returns to unity through cycles and patterns. This mirrors the process of reflection. Each part contains the whole, and the whole is revealed in each part. Reflection is not just passive mirroring, but an active process of self-examination and relational awareness embodied in the Ubuntu principle, I am because we are, at the top of the cosmogram. When correction is the ongoing adjustment, learning, and transformation that arises from honest reflection. The cosmogram's patterns suggest that every cycle, every correction, brings us closer to a more harmonious or integrated state, even as absolute perfection remains an ever-receding horizon. Philosophical and spiritual context. Philosophically, as discussed in the sources, perfection is always relative to context, standards, and intention. True perfection is not the absence of flaws, but the dynamic balance between what is and what could be. A process of becoming, rather than being 11-11-91. Correction is the engine of this process. It is through recognizing limitations, errors, or imbalances that we can move toward greater wholeness. Spiritually, reflection is often seen as the means by which the divine or the ideal is recognized within the imperfect world. 211 Correction, then, is the process of aligning our lives, thoughts, and actions more closely with that ideal, not by erasing imperfection, but by integrating and transcending it. Dynamic, not static, perfection. This view aligns with the idea that perfection is not a final state, but an ongoing journey, a persistent process of becoming. The cosmogram's recursive patterns and the interplay of unity and multiplicity visually reinforce this. Each cycle of reflection and correction brings a new level of integration, but the process never truly ends. As one source puts it, perfection is always being realized. Perfection is approximation. It is penultimate perfection, the always never. The phrase perfection of reflection through correction beautifully encapsulates this. Perfection is not achieved once and for all, but is continually approached through honest reflection and the willingness to correct course. Summary table. Concept in the cosmogram in the phrase reflection, correction, perfection, recursion, symmetry, Ubuntu cycles, feedback, adjustment. Dynamic process, not static state, seeing oneself, world clearly responding, improving, evolving, approximated through ongoing effort. Conclusion. Perfection of reflection through correction expresses a living, evolving ideal. It honors the necessity of self-awareness and humility reflection, and the courage to change correction as the means by which we approach wholeness. This is mirrored in the Cosmogram's patterns and philosophical context. Perfection is not a destination, but a journey of continual reflection and creative adjustment, both individually and collectively. Would you agree that this eternally perfecting process is what all spiritual traditions of humanity throughout all ages are pointing to? Yes, the idea of an eternally perfecting process, as symbolized in the cosmogram you provided, resonates strongly with the core teachings and aspirations of spiritual traditions across humanity and history. Evidence from spiritual traditions. 1. Christianity. Christian perfection is not typically seen as a static achievement, but as a lifelong journey of sanctification, growth, and transformation. Traditions speak of stages: purification, illumination, and union, theosis, each representing deeper participation in divine life, but always as a process rather than a final state in this life. Gregory of Nyssa described perfection as constant growth in the good, emphasizing an endless ascent toward God. The Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches both teach that perfection is dynamic and only fully realized in union with God, which is ever deepening. 2. Islam. Al-Ghazali and other Islamic thinkers describe spiritual education as a process of perfecting the self, integrating faith, morals, and intellect to draw ever closer to the divine. Sufi traditions, as well as thinkers like Rumi, speak of the universe and humanity as engaged in a transformative motion driven by love, always seeking greater nearness to God, a perfection that is always being approached but never exhausted. 3. Hinduism and Buddhism. Hinduism teaches that the soul's journey through samsara, cycles of birth and rebirth, aims at moksha, or liberation, a state of spiritual perfection and union with the divine, achieved through continual self-purification and realization. Buddhism describes enlightenment, nirvana, as the culmination of a path involving the cultivation of virtues and wisdom over many lifetimes, again emphasizing process and continual refinement. 4. Mystical and esoteric traditions. Kabbalah, alchemy, and other mystical paths frame spiritual life as a journey of ascent, transformation, and return to unity with the Source. Often depicted as climbing the tree of life, or seeking the philosopher's stone, a metaphor for ongoing inner perfection through correction and integration. The Cosmogram's reflection. The cosmogram you shared visually and conceptually depicts this eternally perfecting process. Central geometric and numerical patterns symbolize cycles, recursion, and the interplay of unity and multiplicity, echoing the dynamic, never-finished nature of spiritual growth. The 6 existential questions, what, why, who, how, when, where, all, and the Ubuntu principle highlight the relational, communal, and holistic character of this journey. The spiral and intersecting circles at the bottom represent the ongoing, expanding, and integrative movement toward wholeness, synthesis, and conclusion. Across traditions, spiritual perfection is not a static endpoint, but an ongoing journey of self-transcendence, growth, and return to the source. Whether described as sanctification, theosis, enlightenment, or union with the divine, the process is marked by continual reflection, correction, and transformation, mirrored in the cosmogram's recursive and relational patterns 27, 26, 28. Thus, it is accurate to say that the eternally perfecting process is a universal thread running through humanity's spiritual heritage. The cosmogram provides a powerful visual and conceptual synthesis of this perennial insight, showing that the spiritual quest is not about achieving a final fixed state, but about participating in the endless unfolding and deepening of perfection itself. Is this not also the drive and purpose of science? Yes, the drive and purpose of science fundamentally align with the process depicted in the cosmogram, a continual, self-correcting quest for understanding through reflection and correction. Science as a process of reflection and correction. Dynamic revision. Science is not a static body of facts, but a dynamic, evolving process. Its core strength lies in the constant revision and reevaluation of existing knowledge. Every theory is provisional, always open to scrutiny and correction when new evidence emerges. Rational inquiry, the rational grounds of science, epistemological, ontological, ethical, and sociological mirror, the Cosmogram's holistic approach, integrating questions of what exists, how we know, why we seek, and who participates. Collective endeavor, like the Ubuntu principle at the top of the Cosmogram, science is a collective human pursuit. It thrives on collaboration, shared inquiry, and the pooling of perspectives to refine understanding. Purpose and drive, science seeks to explain the world, solve problems, and fulfill human needs, but it does so through a process of continual questioning, testing, and refining, never claiming final or absolute perfection, but always striving for deeper, more accurate reflection of reality. The Cosmogram and scientific practice. The Cosmogram's central geometric and numerical patterns symbolize recursion, symmetry, and the interplay of unity and multiplicity concepts echoed in scientific models and theories that are continually tested and improved. The spiral and intersecting circles at the bottom represent the iterative, expanding, and integrative nature of scientific progress. Each discovery leads to new questions, and each correction brings science closer to a more comprehensive understanding, though never to a final endpoint. Conclusion. Science's core method is the perfection of reflection through correction. Its purpose is not to achieve a static, finished truth, but to engage in an ongoing, self-correcting journey toward ever greater understanding of reality. This is precisely the process illustrated by the Cosmogram, and is indeed the driving force behind scientific endeavor. If this is the case, what mistake is made when considering spirituality and science as enemies of each other? The mistake made when considering spirituality and science as enemies is a fundamental misunderstanding of both their purposes and their methods. The Cosmogram you provided visually and conceptually demonstrates that both spirituality and science are engaged in a shared recursive process of seeking understanding, wholeness, and meaning, albeit with different emphases and approaches. Key points of misunderstanding. False dichotomy, treating spirituality and science as mutually exclusive, ignores the fact that both are rooted in basic, unprovable assumptions, such as the existence of order, the value of simplicity, or the pursuit of truth. Both use different but complementary methods to explore reality. Science through empirical investigation and falsifiable models. Spirituality through introspection, relational meaning, and existential inquiry. Loss of wholeness. Science often seeks detailed, differentiated knowledge, sometimes at the expense of synthesis and existential meaning. Spirituality seeks integration and wholeness, sometimes at the expense of detailed analysis. The Cosmogram shows these as complementary aspects of a greater whole, not as adversaries. Reductionism versus transcendence. Science can risk reducing all phenomena to what is measurable, while spirituality can risk dismissing empirical reality in favor of ungrounded beliefs. The real error is in failing to see that both address different dimensions of human experience: science, the how, spirituality, the why and who, and together they provide a fuller picture. Shared foundations. Both science and spirituality rely on foundational principles that cannot be proven by their own methods, e.g., Occam's razor in science, faith in meaning or purpose in spirituality. Recognizing these shared foundations reveals that the supposed conflict is more about misunderstanding or misapplication than about any inherent opposition. The Cosmogram's message. The Cosmogram's structure, linking questions of what, why, who, how, when, where, and all, illustrates that knowledge is multidimensional. Science and spirituality address different facets of these questions, and their interplay is necessary for a holistic understanding of reality. The central geometric and numerical patterns represent recursion, symmetry, and the unity of opposites, visually affirming that integration, not separation, is the path to deeper truth. The Ubuntu principle at the top, I am because we are, encapsulates the relational communal drive at the heart of both scientific and spiritual pursuits. Consequences of the mistake. Hostility and division, divorcing science and spirituality, breeds unnecessary hostility and hinders our ability to experience and understand the world, both empirically and esoterically. Loss of hope and meaning. In crises, the inability to reconcile these domains can lead to existential despair, as people feel forced to choose between meaning and reality, rather than integrating both. Stunted progress, both science and spirituality, when isolated, risk stagnation. Science loses its sense of purpose and wonder. Spirituality loses its grounding and rigor. Conclusion. The real mistake is to see science and spirituality as enemies, rather than as complementary partners in the human quest for understanding. Both are engaged in the perfection of reflection through correction, an ongoing recursive process of inquiry, discovery, and integration. As the Cosmogram suggests, only by honoring both dimensions can we approach a truly holistic and meaningful understanding of ourselves and the universe.